From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano, joined by Jon Meoli, who is hitting the retweet on the tweet at All Banner Sports. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. You could be watching live on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. In any case, give us a thumbs up, a like, a subscribe. Write us a good review. I'll read it out here on the show. John, you are fresh from a radio appearance. You are going to Paris in a day.
I know.
You have quite a busy week here. I feel like every week is a busy week, though, for you.
It's a busy week. Should we just talk about what I'm doing in Paris?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to see the Eras Tour in Paris. The
Are you
first
really?
show after the Tortured Poets Department came out. You didn't know this
I
part?
actually didn't know this part. I thought you were just going to Paris. There are myriad reasons to go to Paris.
Yeah, this is the best one.
Wow. Are you a huge Swiftie?
Yeah, I'm not like full tinfoil hat. Like my brain's not completely fried by the internet, but like
Sure.
my brain is medium to medium well.
Wow.
In terms of like being fried by Taylor Swift on the internet.
So did you like Tortured Poets Department?
I do like it.
Okay. I know it's controversial.
I think one of the better things that I did was I didn't consume anything around it for like until I got a good feel for it. And like I drove to Connecticut that weekend. So like we had a lot of car time and like I listened to it a lot.
It's a long album.
Yeah. So it was necessary. And I felt like nothing really, you can't really like say anything valuable
that has
immediately. And I say this as somebody who writes about stuff immediately after it happens and like want to like bash my head against the wall because I'm like a day later, I'm like, I could have written 5 different things that were better than what I wrote. Yeah. So shout out to everyone that reviewed this album. I'm sorry, and shout out to you.
Yeah, I mean, give it time. It's any good piece of art takes time to digest, and maybe you don't appreciate it for years after the fact.
It's true. And anyone who wants to revisit any of my columns year after the fact, I'd suggest not to do that.
We go back, and it's going to be just as good.
Yeah, but if you want to listen to albums years after the fact, please do.
Exactly. All right. Well, today we are going to talk a lot about pitching because the Orioles starting pitching has been terrific. We're also going to talk a little bit about Craig Kimbrel and his role at the back end of the Orioles bullpen. And finally, talk a little bit about what the Orioles could use. We're still ways away from the trade deadline, but maybe a sneak preview as we enter May. All right, John, let's talk about the starting pitching because boy, was it good over the weekend. And this is coming off a series at home against the Yankees in which they gave up 6 combined runs over the course of the entire series in 4 games, not just starting pitching, not just bullpen. And then they go into Cincinnati and they dominate. And it was the 3, 4, and 5 guys in the rotation putting up scoreless starts. Cole Irvin in the first game of that series, 6 1/3 scoreless. Jon Means, first start back since last September, 7 scoreless. And then Dean Kremer following it up on Sunday with 6 scoreless. And then you have your 2 aces going this week in Washington. You're saving the best for last. What were you thinking when these 3 starters were going out there dominating a Reds lineup that, granted, isn't the most potent in baseball, but looking utterly phenomenal? Those 3 guys delivering Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think back to opening day after Corbin Burns just absolutely shoved and was like, oh my God, this is what you're getting with Corbin Burns. I went around to talk to as many of the starters as I could find in the clubhouse. And I'm thinking, and I was asking them, like, what do you think as you're watching that? Like, how do you describe that? And like, they told me what they thought. And they also basically to a man were like, this is awesome. Like, we get to do this. Now it's like, we're sitting there watching this, be like, oh man, we got to do this. We have to go and step up. We have to be able to match this. And like, no one's going to go out there and punch out whatever 10, 11 guys every start like Corbin Burns did. But you don't want to be the guy to not do that. And that's like a social, that's a social thing. Like, and like, that's how these things work. But also like, that's, you don't want to be the guy to not do that because there might be a guy who could do that. Otherwise you got Big Al in the bullpen, just waiting to take your rotation spot if you give the opportunity to. But I think that the idea that these pitchers specifically went out and did this at a time when I feel like this time last week, people were wondering what was going to happen with like the pitching because just because of a couple like weird Craig Kimbrel innings. And I know we're going to get to that. Like there was a lot of like, oh my gosh, what is going on with like, what's going to happen with this team's pitching staff? And like
Danielle and I were talking about it a week ago on this podcast.
Yeah. Sitting right here. And like, they just went out and like the Yankees haven't been held to 6 runs in a 4-game series in like 10 years. Then they went out and pitched even better against the Reds, who are not the Yankees, but you have to just give credit to like, this wasn't something. And I think this is something that people who do what we do talk about all the time. It's like, when like the offseason, what are they going to do about their pitching? And like they traded for Corbin Burns, like that's pretty much as good as you could do. But like they've done this over the course of time, and like it's all lined up now where like they have a lot of good starting pitching right now.
Yeah, it is remarkable. And it like we said, it's those 3, 4, and 5 guys. I like the idea that Corbin Burns has kind of elevated the level of competition in this bullpen or in this starting rotation, because you look last year and Kyle Bradish stepped up and by the end of the season proved himself to be an ace, garnering Cy Young votes, starting game 1 of the ALDS. But he didn't come into the season guaranteed to be the ace. He didn't come into the season starting opening day. It just kind of built over the course of time. And now you add somebody as a 1A to Kyle Bradish's 1B. Bradish just came back and pitched pretty well. That just brings a kind of veteran presence where you also do believe that you can go out there and shove. And when the competition is as fierce, like you said, Albert Suarez out in the bullpen, ready to take somebody's spot.
Clock's ticking.
Yeah, if they drop, and we know Tyler Wells is going to come back at some point. We know Grayson Rodriguez is going to come back at some point. Those guys are going to need rotation spots. At least one of them will, and Grayson Rodriguez. Tyler Wells maybe will go to the bullpen. But the competition is pretty fierce, and it's just like the position players on this roster. If you don't put up, there's a prospect waiting in Norfolk who's ready to take your spot.
Yeah, and you think about, Heston Kjerstad's, lot in life right now. Like, there's also the part where you could be in the big leagues and not in the role you want to be.
True.
I'm sure that, given the option of starting and, being in the bullpen, all these guys would pick starting. But, like, the reality is there's not going to be that option. I feel like it was only, like, a week and a half ago when they sent Jackson Holliday down that Mike Elias was basically like, so he was asked about all these pitchers coming back, and he was like, something's going to happen. Don't worry. And then like smash cut to 5 days later, and Grayson Rodriguez's shoulder hurts, and like, you got your answer.
Yep.
It's just,
unfortunately
not the one that anyone would have chosen. Not that you would choose anyone to get injured, but that's definitely not the one you would have chosen. Right. And I think there's a lot of quality in that rotation that kind of gets overlooked as you were seeking who the Corbin Burns was going to be or who's going to turn into that guy. Over the interim, like a lot of people have turned themselves into like really good starting pitchers.
Yeah, specifically the 3 guys we saw in Cincinnati, Irvin, Means, and Kremer, and each of them obviously have different stories, but they all have different things that they've been working on. Cole Irvin came into spring training talking about the increased movement that he had on a lot of his pitches, and it showed in the first couple starts, but he wasn't getting the results. And then I think it was his 3rd start of the season. He said he calmed himself down and he focused on just going out there and pitching. And now that's 20 2/3 scoreless innings for Cole Irvin in a row, a guy who the second that Bradish and Means were set to come back, I thought he was going to be the first guy that gets bumped to the bullpen, and he's terrific. And then Jon Means, first start since last September, first time he's gone 7 innings since September of 2021.
Wow.
Dominant performance for Jon Means. And then Dean Kremer, another guy who we saw stumble early in the season, but figured things out. And a guy who has really worked hard adding a new pitch to his repertoire, as you've written about on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months, and also wanting to be a workhorse. So these guys are all working on different things. And that's something that this is Cole Irvin's, he just spent his first full off season as an Oriole. Jon Means has not had the kind of health and not been able to pitch as much as he would have liked to. And he had maybe more of an extended offseason now that he's not recovering from Tommy John to work on things. And then Dean Kremer, just another year in this system, getting to work with Drew French, the new pitching coach. All of these guys, yes, you can point to the player development side of things and the Orioles player development side and the pitching coaches, but you can also point to the players themselves for digging deep, figuring out what they needed to adjust and making those adjustments.
Yeah, as we're talking about this, I'm thinking, I don't know if last April, if Cole Irvin even pitched 20 innings before he got sent down, and they were like, you know what?
Yeah, it was 3 starts.
Yeah, 3 starts, and it was like very clear very early on that like there needed to be some work done.
Yes.
And for him to be, to do that work, to, swallow that very, very unpleasant pill and to go in and put in an off season's worth of work, like this is the type of thing that can happen. It's not like, you put X in, you get X out. Like stuff happens, like guys can work and they can end up getting hurt, or they can work and it could be bad work. And this seems like it was the right work. With Jon Means, there's so there's so much value to having him. And what he did, he didn't put up a lot of starts like this in like the before times, like when he was, even when he was an all-star and when he was like grinding it out in 2020 and, 2021 through a no-hitter. But like this wasn't often what he did. His value to this Orioles rotation, even when they needed a lot of other things, was like he was just going to go out there and he was going to grind you out like a decent, like to good start. He wasn't going to go out there and dominate. And the idea that he spent all this time, and he was pretty good when he came back last year. The idea that he spent all this time kind of waiting for this next opportunity to arise, it strikes me as like somebody who, having been through what he was like, is just like, all right, like I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do this. Like as good as I'm going to be that good right now.
Yeah.
And that's really impressive. And I think Dean Kremer, I think there's like a gulf, to me at least, about the perception versus like the reality. Like he did not turn into, what Kyle Bradish has turned into. Nobody's going to be like slamming their fist on the table and be like Dean Kremer for All-Star, Dean Kremer Cy Young votes. But like there aren't a lot of guys who consistently, like, I guess, I don't want to say perform, but like outside of basically the first month of last year, this is probably somebody who, since the start of 2022, has an ERA that starts with a 3 and with one particularly poor month in it. The playoff start is what it is, but this is somebody who's constantly reinventing. And that's kind of why I wanted to write about his new splitter. And I can't speak to the results of it just now. I assume it's still probably a pretty decent pitch. I haven't checked on it in a while, but that's why I wanted to write about it, because for somebody who's always evolving, who's always tinkering, you never know what the thing is going to be that, that puts you from level 3 to level 2.
All right, we're still live. Let's figure this out here. Hopefully, everybody can still hear us. Paul Mancano and Jon Meoli.
Wow.
The laptop fell, and John, I don't think that was your fault. I think that was probably my fault for setting this up.
How's that sound? Is that a good angle? I just get real fired up when I talk about Dean Kremer. What do you want? What do you want?
We got to go back and watch that after this, just to see the calamity that was the laptop falling live on the podcast.
Yeah, this is like probably a good like summer hues. Got the orange background, our beat red faces, being like, what the heck just happened? My maroon shirt. We got everything going on right now.
The fact that the screen is not cracked is a minor miracle. Wow. Gosh. I'm just counting my lucky stars. All right. Well, we won't use this stand again. All right, John. That's a great point that you were making about Dean Kremer right before the laptop fell.
Yeah, couldn't begin to even go back to where I was. I think I was basically just saying, like, you don't know what the adjustment is going to be that takes a player from like, good to very good, from very good to great. And it's possible what this is, but we're talking about somebody who has not stopped tinkering and tweaking what he does to stay ahead of hitters since he got to the big leagues. And when you have that mindset and you're always working on stuff's going to get better. Yeah.
And I think it's also interesting because I'm still laughing about this. This is just thank you for everybody who's still tuning in. There are still 316 people who just watched a laptop collapse in front of us. And
I think there's somebody out there who's like, guys, you got to turn this on.
Probably our bosses.
These bozos just dropped the laptop.
Let's hope none of our supervisors are watching. That's great. I think it's also interesting because look, all of the the hype around the position player prospects for the Orioles the last few years, and there hasn't been a whole lot on the pitching side, with the exception of Grayson Rodriguez, who this year before his injury was starting to look like he's turning into the ace that we all think he can be. And DL Hall was really the only other guy that was considered at one point a top 75, top 50 prospect in baseball. And he, of course, was dealt in the deal that got them Corbin Burns. Other than that, it's, Dean Kremer was never a top 100 prospect. Tyler Wells was never a top 100 prospect. He was a Rule 5 guy. Cole Irvin was acquired for Darryl Hernandez last offseason from the Oakland A's. And John Means, everybody knows his story of coming from, relative obscurity, spending 3 seasons in Bowie, and then coming out and turning his changeup into one of the best pitches in baseball. So these guys, that it shows that you get out of a lot of these guys what you put in. And the Orioles have consistently given these guys opportunities. They've given a lot of guys opportunities over the years, as we've seen in Baltimore, that we've covered, that have not turned into quality starting pitchers, whether because, the talent just wasn't quite there, or there wasn't enough opportunity for them. But these guys have been given chances in a lot of cases, and you are hoping that the rising tide raises all boats, that the cream will rise to the top. And that's what you've gotten, where you've gotten now 3 guys who have gotten consistent time to work with this player development staff, to work with these pitching coaches. And sure, we may not have forecast them having good careers years ago, but they have turned themselves into something, and they've given themselves, as you've written about on the BaltimoreBanner.com, they've given the Orioles a lot of quality depth. It's not just, these aren't just throwaway arms. They are turning into actual weapons for Brandon Hyde and this pitching staff.
Yeah, and I think that's where the sea change kind of happened. And when I wrote that last week, it was in kind of not in response to, but we're in this environment where, like, a lot of people are wondering, oh, who's going to come up because X? If Craig Kimbrel, who's going to do this? Who's going to be in this spot? And, like, I think that what really matters is going to matter ultimately with this team is that the top end is so much higher. That just means the floor is higher.
Right.
There are, like, 4A type up and down relievers on the 40-man roster, but it's May and the Orioles haven't really, like, dipped into that bucket at all. There was a Jonathan Heasley stint. There was a little Nick Vespi early in the season when Jacob Webb.
Sprinkling of Nick Vespi.
Yeah, just a little dash of Nick Vespi. And I want to say that's it.
Pretty much.
I can't even, I'm sure I'm missing something, but, like, for a team that has started with 2 pitchers on the injured list, and like 2 starters on the injured list, and had 2 starters go onto it, and I don't even remember what the Cionel Perez move was. So I guess I
think that might have been Heasley.
Oh, maybe. We're just talking through roster moves that we don't actually know about at this point. But I don't think there's been that, like, need to do that up and down. And there are those pieces there. I was talking to some folks down in Norfolk for some other stories, and, like, those pitchers are pitching well, and they're all options if they need them to be. But I think we're not past. There's going to be a moment where, the Orioles are going to be really short in the bullpen, and it's going to be Brian Baker's day to pitch in Norfolk, and he's going to get his jersey back and get to come back to Baltimore. And, like, that's okay. That's not the everyday. It's not like, I feel like we're almost like Buck Showalter pilled at this point, where, like, everything was like, we need to have a million relievers available, and, like, who's going to come up this day? This person pitched back to back. Can they go down? This person's available now. Can they go up? Like, that, there's value to that. Sure. And the Orioles are not, like, immune to trying to find little pockets of value and little incremental advantages when it comes to the roster. But there's just a lot of good, like, quality pitchers on this roster. And that goes to the bullpen too. I've never, Jacob Webb is doing things that somebody who was claimed off waivers less than a year ago, you wouldn't expect him up. Mike Baumann is good more often than he's not good. And I don't know that that's a perception, widely. I think there's just a very, very high floor for this pitching staff. And I don't think that's going to lower anytime soon, given what we know about the people who are on the horizon, the people who are coming back from injury, stuff like that. Yeah,
there is just a level of stability in this rotation right now that you haven't seen in this organization for several years. This is just the ability to throw out consistently 5 guys in a row that you feel pretty good about, to at times great about, with Corbin Burnes and Kyle Bradish.
Yeah.
And we'll see, if that continues. Like you said, it does look good for the time being, because there are guys that we haven't even seen yet that are in AAA that could be making their way to Baltimore at some point soon. Cade Povich. And I thought, honestly, when Tyler Wells was hitting the IL, I thought we might see one of those prospects get added. Chase McDermott, somebody of that ilk. I know Seth Johnson's still down in AA, but one of those, top 30 prospects in their system get the call. They called on Albert Suarez, who was a free agent signing. He's 34 years old, or older than that, and stepped up and in a big way. So this team does have a lot of options. Let's talk about the bullpen real quickly, because there is some concern, I think you could say, among the Orioles fan base and Craig Kimbrel. And I think pretty much whatever organization he has pitched for in his entire career, there has been concern about Craig Kimbrel at some point during his journey with them. He looked great. Obviously, he missed some time with that injury. And he had that back tightness, missed a few games. The Orioles gave save opportunities to Danny Coulombe and then Jacob Webb. He then came back and looked great in the first game of the series in Cincinnati, struck out the side, then pitched the next night. Not so good. Had to be pulled with 1 out in the 9th as he was leaving runners on 1st and 3rd at the time. And Yennier Cano had to come in and save the game for the Orioles. There is the health question for Craig Kimbrel because of that back tightness. There's the age question because he's 35. And then there's also the performance question. How much of this do you think is how much blame can we divvy up to those 3 factors?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think it all comes down to performance, honestly. If he was 45 and he was going out there and he was just,
just Jamie Moyer.
Yeah. If he was just going out there and getting 3 outs and, high-fiving 2-3 times a week, like, it wouldn't matter. The health stuff is its own little boat, but I think that if somebody is able to do the job that they're asked to do, no matter their age or how they're doing it, like, it's going to be okay. I think with Craig Kimbrel specifically, and a lot of, like, I guess more broadly, like, experienced closers, I don't know that there are a lot of, like, people who are like Craig Kimbrel. But to me, you sign Craig Kimbrel for, like, the aggregate. Like, he is going to save 85. I think last year was like 87% of his save opportunities he converted. It was like a sub-1 whip. It was
an all-star appearance.
Yeah, he was an all-star. It went badly at the end, is what I understand from people who follow the Phillies. But it feels to me like you're going to get that. It feels to me like you are going to get that on the aggregate still, which means that you have to kind of zoom out and not freak out. I'm not saying people can freak out about whatever they want. Like, do whatever you want. People are passionate about sports, and if the team is winning in the 9th inning and then they lose, like, that stinks. And there's a lot of feelings that come with that. I just feel like the Orioles are not going to endure for longer than they think is reasonable with Craig Kimbrel as the closer if they don't think he's going to be the closer. It's completely different. Like, we're talking about like a 15-year age gap, but like Mike Elias said, the second they realized that, like, Jackson Holliday might need to work on stuff, there was no point in having him work on it in the big leagues.
Sure.
They were like, okay, if this is what we're doing, then, like, let's not fart around. Let's just do it. So the idea that, like, if they don't think that Craig Kimbrel can do this job, they're just going to persist and persist and persist. And, like, that feels very unrealistic to me.
Right.
I think that you're going to get outings when he just kind of cruises, and you're going to get outings where he just doesn't. And if we're in a phase now where, like, they're trying to figure out what the answer to that question is, and you make sure that somebody is ready to go, he walks out of the bullpen and the phone rings again, he's like, hey, make sure Danny's ready.
Yeah.
Don't tell anybody. Like, something like that. Maybe they're in that phase, and, like, if he doesn't have it, you get him out of there.
Right. You were in the double barrel. You're warming up Craig Kimbrel and somebody else at the same time.
Yeah. They're gonna have to be very sneaky about it. Maybe,
you don't want to insult him.
Yeah, but he's no dummy. Like, he's gonna be able to hear those pops in the bullpen behind him. If it's not going well, and if that keeps happening, then I think it's a different conversation. But I put to you, if the Craig Kimbrel, it seems like this is like the number one, like, what's gonna happen thing. Like, what's number 2? Like, what's the, like, number 2 problem for this team? Because it doesn't feel like it's even close in scope of, like, this. So I wonder too if there's a part of this whole Craig Kimbrel dialogue discourse that's just like, what else are we going to worry about?
because literally every other potential problem on this team does have a natural solution. Like Austin Hayes coming out of the gate and struggling. Guess what? You have Colton Cowser right there, who's having a phenomenal rookie season. You have Heston Kjerstad, who you called up. You have Connor Norby as a potential outfield option. Every other area of this team has a natural spot for somebody to take that spot. But we were talking off air about your take about closers, which is either I'll let you say.
Yeah. I mean, either you're a good closer or you're not a closer anymore. Like,
right.
How long, if Craig Kimbrel is actually not a good closer, and I'm not saying that he's not, if is blowing 2 saves a series.
Yeah.
How many series does he get to do that for?
Not many.
2,
you would think.
3,
Yeah.
4. 4 seems like a lot.
Yeah.
4 seems like a lot. That's 8 blown saves in the course of like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
There's no chance that any baseball team that is trying to go to the playoffs, win a World Series, would let that happen. So like, you are a good closer. Like, you're not like Felix Bautista was a great elite closer.
Yeah.
Zach Britton was an elite closer. There's a whole tier of like just closers, like good closers, guys who save more games than they don't.
Yep.
And then there's guys who are not closers.
Yes.
And like, I think as long as Craig Kimbrel still is the closer, then like he's a fine closer. And that's kind of where we're at right now.
And when they signed him in the offseason, I guess my concern, other than the struggles that we saw in the playoffs last year from Craig Kimbrel and the concern that he might again turn into a pumpkin in October, is that my other concern was that if he is not closing games, if he is struggling, where do you put him? Because he has pitched the vast majority of his appearances have come in save situations, have come in the 9th inning. He's barely pitched in other innings because he's exclusively been used there. He's 35. He's very clearly chasing some saves records. He is now up over 400 and he's looking to climb higher. You know, you brought him in here to be a veteran and told him he was going to be the closer. And we've seen how Yennier Cano handles the save situations. And aside from that game in Cincinnati, and aside from a couple of moments here and there, he has not proven to have a closer's mentality, which is fine. There are a lot of great 8th inning setup men. He was a great 8th inning setup man last year for Felix Bautista, but probably at this point can't be counted on to close out games. So if Craig Kimbrel is healthy, if he is available to pitch, but they don't trust him to close games, would he be able to accept the role of an 8th inning guy? Would he be able to go out there and still pitch with the same intensity if he's not in a save situation?
Yeah, I would think so. I would kind of bet on, I would bet, not actual bet money, but I would bet on the player for something like that, because if he wants to pitch beyond this year, I know there's some, options and stuff like that where it could be here, it could be elsewhere, but like,
yeah, he's got a team option, I believe, for next year for $13 million.
And if the Orioles decline that, there's going to be people who watch how he reacts to this.
Yes.
And this situation, should anything come to pass. My gut would be that, given that he has pitched a lot of innings and he has, the normal wear and tear of somebody who rips their arm behind their back and throws a baseball as hard as they can, for as long as he has, if it gets to the point where the Orioles need to make some kind of move, I feel like it will not be a demotion. It will be a physical reset. And you get him to as good of a point as he can physically, and then you bring him back and you keep giving him those options. Maybe you gradually build him back into the closer role. But it doesn't feel like to me that the team's going to get home on Friday, and if things go shaky or whenever they come home, I'm not really interested in the schedule while I'm in Paris. If they come home and it's not going to be Brandon's going to sit down at the interview room and be like, Craig's not our closer anymore.
Right.
I don't think that's how that's going to go.
Yeah.
I think that it would be a little more political, dignified, however you want to call it. And I think
peaceful transfer of power.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to. Never mind. I struggle to think that it would just be like a clear demotion. I assume that he would be fine with it. I think there's some that's complicating because it's easy to have a guy who only pitches 1 inning when that inning is the 9th and the game's over after.
Right.
But these are all problems for Brandon Hyde at some point if it comes to that.
Yeah. I asked Danielle Allentuck on our last week's pod if she could pick an area to upgrade on this team via trade. Would it be starting pitching or would it be bullpen? Because I don't think you could say anywhere in the lineup needs an upgrade at this time that couldn't be found in AAA Norfolk.
Yeah.
But in terms of the bullpen and the rotation, I think at least, I don't want to base everything off of a week, but I feel a whole lot better about this rotation a week later than I did a week ago. That being said, you still want Grayson Rodriguez to come back healthy. You still want Tyler Wells to come back in a starting role or in a relief role. And you still want these strong performances from Irvin and Kremer to maintain themselves, and Means to stay healthy as well. But if you were to add to this bullpen, the Orioles obviously have a long time to figure this out. They have until the end of July. But they may have to decide between, do we go out and get a 9th inning designated closer at the deadline, or do we just get somebody who can be used in high leverage situations and it doesn't have to be in the ninth inning? Because honestly, I think there are the ninth inning designated closers are a little bit of a dying breed because a lot of managers choose to throw their best relievers in the highest leverage situations, and those situations aren't always the ninth inning. So maybe there will be more guys available who are just quote unquote high leverage guys and not coming in having to take the ball in the ninth inning like Craig Kimbrel does.
Yeah, and I think that the reason that I guess my answer would be that it would be that like high leverage type guys instead of like a designated closer, because if you're trying to trade for a team's closer, the person who's on the other line in those trade calls is going to have to justify trading their closer. And even when the team is, even like the 100-loss Orioles and like when they I guess they weren't losing 100 games in a 60-game season in 2020, but like they traded like their entire bullpen.
Yeah.
And they were like kind of good. They were okay that year.
Yeah, 25 and 35.
Yeah. They were in the playoff race until last week and somehow got the 5th pick in the draft, which is crazy. Yeah, worked out well. They have to justify doing that. There's a premium if you're trading for a closer, and there's a premium when you're trading for players in season as well. And it's very hard for me to envision the Orioles paying that price. I also think that, truthfully, there's probably going to be guys who come available because they will be replaced as like leverage relievers by people who we haven't even heard of right now. Like that's how these things work.
We didn't know who Jacob Webb was at this point last year.
Yeah. I mean, somebody could be supplanted by their team's version of Yenny or Cano.
Right.
Like that's how guys just pop. Like there's going to be people coming up from the minors right now whose team's been looking at him for like a month and be like, what are we doing? What's this guy doing in AAA?
Yeah.
Let's get him up here. These things move very, very quickly. I struggle to think of a universe where the Orioles are like, we have to go get a closer. We're willing to pay what it takes to get a closer. Because in addition to it being a really high price and just a really concerning like thing to do, it's so volatile.
Yeah.
You're bringing guys into different environments. Relief pitching is weird. If you go out and trade for a closer with those high expectations, if they have 2 bad outings in the course of being there for like 2 months on your team, like it's going to look like a bad deal statistically. And
like the Josh Hader trade to the Padres where he came out and immediately struggled.
Yeah. And there's no coming back from that.
Right.
So I think they would probably try to add something more leveragey. The issue for me is getting there, because in an ideal world, you have all these starting pitchers healthy. The reality is that not all of them / probably I think none of them can go get stretched out in Norfolk and stay on the rotation schedule. So like if you are choosing to move someone to the bullpen, who is especially on the younger side, I think Albert Suarez can and would do anything at this point because he's in the big leagues. And shout out to him. He gets to be in big leagues. Like he'll pitch whenever you want. But you're not going to say to a Dean Kremer, like you're a reliever now, and then 3 weeks later, okay, build back up again. That's really challenging. And I think it's going to be really fascinating to see how they navigate that, and however they decide to make those decisions, if they have to, is probably going to inform what this deadline looks like to me.
Yeah. And you also don't want to be in a situation where they were last September, where they weren't counting on the injury to Felix Bautista coming after the trade deadline, which really screwed them. But you don't want to be in a situation where you're claiming Jorge Lopez and hoping to recapture something for the final month of the season.
Yeah.
When you're still in a division race. And I know he didn't make the playoff roster, but to be throwing guys in high leverage situations in September and October that you're not fully comfortable with, you need to build depth on depth on depth. And Mike Elias has several months now to figure out what this team needs. And I think it's also interesting because usually we wouldn't be talking about trades this early in the season, but we just saw the Marlins trade Luis Arias. So anything can happen this early. And the Marlins have a whole lot of pitching that has all been terrible so far this season. They have those good young guys in the rotation. Edward Cabrera, sometimes starter. He's sometimes a reliever. Sixto Sanchez, Trevor Rogers, Jesus Luzardo. All those guys have ERAs over 6. But look, if the Orioles want to buy low on somebody right now, it seems like the Marlins are open for business.
Yeah, get them up to Bel Air in the pitching lab. Go to work. Let's go.
Yeah.
I'm really fascinated to see how this deadline works. I think that the Orioles are going to have, just like they have in the past, like, and I don't argue even a little bit with Mike Elias has said, like they could make any trade they want to.
Sure.
It's just a matter of making the right trades and making trades that aren't going to hurt them in the long run.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see them, and it's a little counterintuitive if we're talking about bringing in pitching, but like, I think that a lot of the trades that they're going to be able to make in July are going to be based around pitching going out as well. because they're starting to get a real meaningful concentration of like interesting stuffy pitchers in the high minors who all have to get added to the roster. And those are the easiest trades to make. It's easy to trade guys you traded for. Historically, teams do that. Not to say the Orioles have. I don't believe they have under Michael Elias, but generally
less invested in them.
Yeah. I think there's kind of a train of thought that that's true. I don't want to say the Orioles do or do not feel that way. That happens more often than not. Sure. And guys who needed to get out of the roster. That's how Seth Johnson ended up here, because he was hurt and the Rays were like, what are we going to do with this guy? And the Orioles said, we'll take him.
Yeah.
And, that's how that worked. But, all these pitchers we talked about in AAA, whether it's Cade Povich, Chase McDermott, Justin Armbruster also in the rotation there. Those three guys are Rule 5 eligible.
Right.
All the guys who are coming back from injury, Kyle Brnovich, Brandon Young.
All guys you wrote about.
All the guys I wrote about in the Baltimore Banner today. Teams are looking at these guys and be like, all right, like maybe we can get these guys. And if the Orioles are thinking and feeling the same things about them, that there's like value there, the value could be realized by trading them earlier. So I think there's going to be a lot of ammunition. I do feel like we learned a lot last year about what they want to do. And it's been, even with the Corbin Burnes trade, they're very willing to make trades that they feel are reasonable, and also will trade pieces that they don't know how they're going to keep long term.
Sure.
So there's going to be a decent amount of those people who are available to be traded. It's just a matter of finding the deal and finding people who want them and getting something that can help you. And that's going to be another factor that I think we really have to talk about as this is getting closer. Like, it's going to be a pretty high bar to upgrade the Orioles pitching staff the way that it's constituted now.
Yep.
In July.
Yeah. It's something, it makes me think back to the Corbin Burnes trade in DL Hall, where it was like the Orioles had a possible role for DL Hall as a reliever, but they knew that other teams might still view him as a starter. And so in order to capitalize on that, you had to trade him when you did, essentially. And it worked out, lined up perfectly with Milwaukee. But if he had gone another season of pitching in their bullpen, maybe he would have been less valuable at this time.
Yeah, 100%.
So, and when you get closer to the Rule 5 draft eligibility, I thought it was funny because for guys that have covered this team throughout the entire dark years, to me, the rebuild really felt over when the Orioles did not add a single guy to the 40-man roster to protect him from the Rule 5 draft. Because how many years in a row did we have to cover their additions to the 40-man roster right before the deadline as if it was the Super Bowl?
Yeah.
Because it was like they got to add DL Hall and Zach Lowther and Alexander Wells and Ryland Bannon to the 40-man. And then this year, very quietly, they didn't add anybody because they had a full roster full of big league caliber guys, and there was nobody that they considered. All the guys that, were worth being added to the 40-man were already on the team.
Yeah. Or they moved them because they're like, we're not going to, Darryl Hornez was in advance of, it was a full season earlier. They were looking at it and like, I don't know how we're going to do this.
Right.
So they traded them for Cole Irvin, which looks better in,
it does look better now.
Well, it looks pretty good now.
And even though Hornez is on the A's, and they didn't take anybody.
Yeah. So good teams lose people. The Yankees lose pitchers every year.
Yeah.
Some of them stick, some of them don't. If you develop pitchers well, teams are going to want them. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for these guys internally, and there's also only X amount of roster spots in the big leagues and on the 40. And I guess as a flip side, I'm wondering too if any of these guys are just going to get shotgunned and their development's going to be like, look, let's get you in a bullpen, let's get you throwing, and you're healthy, your stuff's here. Like, let's see what it looks like. It's going to be fascinating.
Whatever happened to Zach Pop, by the way? I know he bounced around on the guy that was taken from the Orioles in the Rule 5 draft. Is he still around?
I would assume so.
I
couldn't tell you. He got taken by the Marlins?
I think he did, and he pitched for them.
Yeah, he might have ended up on that, I feel like there's a whole universe of pitchers that just go between the Marlins and the Rays for some reason.
Yes.
Because the Marlins are like, oh, the Rays don't want this guy. Sounds great.
And the Orioles inserted themselves into that rotation for.
Yeah, the Orioles have done that. They have trafficked in that. Joey Crable and there were a couple.
Sean Armstrong. Yeah. All those guys. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to listening to two older guys talk about the dark years of the Baltimore Orioles. Because right now they're playing great baseball. And
very different.
Very different. Times have certainly changed. At Jon Meoli is his Twitter handle. I'm at Paul Mancano. By the way, if you are watching, I'm definitely going to cut out all that audio of the laptop falling and almost breaking. So you're watching an exclusive stream because that will not be available on the audio-only platforms. Thanks for sticking along with us during that entire
Yeah, that was wild. That was wild. Like
That
I
was-
said, just get real fired up and talk with my hands sometimes.
Yeah. Aren't you glad you joined the Banner? What a top-notch production value we really have here for the Banner Baseball Show.
So I used to carry around when I was at the Sun. I used to carry around a little folding tripod, and I got like a selfie
Really?
stick with the attachment,
Ooh.
so I could put it on the tripod and just talk into the camera. So that was the floor for me, and everything else
An extra
is
$5.
above it. Is
Yeah.
above it. Everything else is above it.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad we've met and it exceeded your expectations.
Yeah.
Read all of John's great work on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where Andy Koska and Danielle Allentuck and Kyle Goon also have you completely covered. John's got to get to a meeting. I have to get to another meeting as well. So thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll